competition process, we met with the client 3 times interactively. And at a certain point, I explained to them that we were actually burying most of his building in the hillside. Because I said, this is a really big piggy building, 50,000 square feet, and that nobody wants to see a big building like this. We're going to sink it in the ground. And he said, well, that's okay. He was okay with that. They said, well, what's this thing over here? And I said, well, you know, we had a hydrologist out there, and these cuts in this hillside are going to be someplace in the range of 50 to 75 feet deep. And in the Northwest, we're on a lot of gravel and glacier till, and every 20 feet, you have gravel ends, it's running water. And so we figured we're going to pick up probably, as the geologist told us, maybe 300 gallons a minute from all of the excavations. We want to run it out in this corner of the property right here. And we want to run it out in a way that it'll run out and we'll create a freshwater estuary. And he said, freshwater estuary, is that the same as a swamp? And he said, no, it's a freshwater estuary. He said, it's a swamp. And he came back and said, are you, and I won't use the expletives, you can imagine what they were, because he has got a real temper. He said, it's the dumbest blanking thing he ever heard in his life. And we said, no, it's not. And we got into this real argument. And at one point, he said something like, you know how much this property cost me? And I said, I don't know. It cost me $20,000 a front foot. You want to take 125 of it and turn it into a swamp? And we said, yeah, you can afford it. It got heated. And at a certain point, and this is absolutely a true life, because Peter Boland and our landscape architect, Tom Berger, and I are all in the room arguing. And I said, look, Bill, first of all, you're going to be living here a really long time because no one else in the world could afford this house. Okay, number one. And if you're going to live here, do you really think your children are growing up normally when they've got 2-inch thick bulletproof glass in their windows? Don't you want to have a place where if you build this thing, you can come home and you can mark the seasons of your life and your children's lives as wildlife finds this place, because this urban lake is not like your lakes. It has been bulkheaded and banked, yards built right up to the edge of it. All those shallows where life flourishes have been destroyed. But if you give back to the environment this little estuary, every form of wildlife will find it. And you'll be able to mark your life by the way this wildlife finds it and comes back seasonally. So then he turns to us, and this might bounce off a lot of you young people. He turns to us and says, you mean to say if I build it, they will come? He said, that's exactly what we did. To his credit, he turned right around and said, you know, it's a really great thing, you ought to do it. And that was it. He'll argue like crazy, but if you just stand up and if you're right, he'll back right off. So, that's the first story that's related to the last one. Now, right after we got the commission, my partner Peter had a stroke, and I was left with this complicated problem of trying to slow the project down so Peter could recover and still keep the project. And I happened to be lecturing at Timberline. Oh, actually, before that, the contractor, we decided we were going to do a little guest house first, just slow the project down a little. And the contractor came to me and said, you know, Bill wants the best quality of wood he can get, so we'd like you to come out in the forest and pick the old growth trees you want to cut down for the project. And we said, wow, that's a problem. And it just happened. It just happened that weekend I was lecturing to the American Timber Framers Guild, and I had all of Gates's just first initial freehand sketches and everything I was going to show. And so I give this lecture, and a guy comes up to me after the lecture and says, hey, you know, you ought to build that building out of salvage lumber. I said, why do you say that? He said, first of all, we cut down all the good trees 100 years ago. Second, I saw your cross-sections. You got 5 feet of cross grain in there, and how are you going to make that up to concrete surfaces on your back walls? You're going to get too much shrinkage. And finally, I just listened to your lecture, and I think it's the right thing to do, Jim. So we went to Bill, and we said, hey, Bill, we need about $3 million. we want to set up the world's first heavy timber recycled sawmill. And he gave us the money. And this is Bill's house. So this is Bill's house, and in a different form. This is the Longview sawmill. We bought there are 3 buildings like this that represented 2.5 million board feet of lumber. And we disassembled them, shipped them to our own mill in Bellingham, Washington, and we remilled them into Bill's house. So this is Bill's house. This is the first board that we cut. This is Max Talbert, the guy, the used car salesman of lumber. The guy talked to this. And this is the first board we cut. It was a 1x14 vertical grain clear 32-foot long board. So Bill has the finest collection of Douglas fir in the world, and it's all salvage material. This is that building this is the reuse of that material. Now this is just the guest house, or the caretaker's building. Everybody in my office applied for the caretaker. And I won't get into the architecture, frankly, because there's a particular thread I want to follow here. But that's our reused lumber. I could get into a lot of stories about this building and Peter and I designing the furniture, but it would take forever. And then we had the situation where he needed to park about 50 cars on a steep hillside. So we came back and said, the garage really ought to be back down on the ground and we ought to bury it. And the hillside was so steep, this is the drive coming down, that the road had to leave the ground. So we built a trestle, and across this trestle you can turn and go back into this garage. And when we did it, it was going to be 80 feet below grade at the back end, and far back in the hillside. And I was standing there in the excavations with our commercial engineer, Dave Osmond, and Dave and I are watching this water pour out of the hillside in every direction. And these are giant arches. Here, I'll go to the next. Actually, I'll go back one. These are giant arches, okay? And they still are designed to carry 4-foot diameter trees on top. So they really have a tremendous load on them. And if you, as students, know, if you have an arch, but if you have a load in the middle and you don't strain the side with a flying buttress or something like that, the thing flattens out. So we did giant ties, big grade beams about this tall, that tied the arches together like a bowstring. Okay, well, I'm standing there in the hole with these giant ties and the water pouring out, and Dave and I had the same idea at the same moment. We thought, we're going to pour a slab at the bottom, we'll put concrete plank on top, and the floor of the garage will become a giant cistern, which is our water source for the whole property, for both buffering the wetlands and for irrigation of everything. Now, the other thing that happened was this, is that our landscape architect, Tom Berger, had, how do I put it? He was the son of a logger, and he explained to us in the Northwest, when you cut down a forest, you immediately burn the forest floor because it has all these trees that were non-commercial in the forest floor, primarily alder and big leaf maple. A red alder is a very interesting tree. It grows very fast, dies, but it prepares the soil for a climax forest of evergreens. By preparing it, that is, it has nitrogen-fixing nodules on the roots. And we thought, wow, why are we going to try to plant a climax forest that builds? Why don't we plant alder, which grow in the ditches and people treat like weeds? We went out and we bought 5,000 alders for about $100. And then we went out and we bought 100 truckloads of forest floor. We just bought the forest floor as like kind of Save the Children campaign. And we smeared it over Bill's property and then watered it to see what would come up. And this was about 6 years into the property. Alders grow really fast. They're the tall, skinny ones. They grow about 2-3 feet a year if properly irrigated. And this is what came up. We got every kind of plant in the world came up. This is the garage. This is the grade beams that restrain it. It's very good. Parks about 30 cars. It's a women's collegiate basketball court, and it's great for parties. Very loud, though. Very loud. 5 surfaces.